Good morning, Sherry.
Good morning, Etiony.
Good to see you again. For the benefit of the audience, we're now talking to Dr. Sherry Hamby, research professor of psychology at the University of the South, the director of LifePath Research Center, a center for resilience and social justice research based in rural Appalachia. She's also the founder and co-chair of resilience.com. For your information too, Sherry is a fairly recent scientific board member of the Melissa Institute. We're happy to have you with us. And we're getting ready for a course and a presentation by Sherry on June 11th on trauma is everywhere, but so is resilience. And really looking forward to hear you talk about that. We know that Sherry has been busy producing materials, and it has a new book out that is I think it's coming out in November. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. And but for now, let me just say, welcome, Sherry. So tell us, what are you up to these days?
Thank you, Etiony, and thank you so much for having me here today. Well, I mean, the book that you mentioned is one of the big things I'm working on these days. I wrote it with Vicki Banyard from Rutgers University, and it is an extension of our resilience portfolio model, which is trying to shift the field of trauma work and people who work with violence and victims of violence to more strengths-based approaches instead of just removing symptoms. And so now we're trying to do the same thing for prevention and trying to get people to shift off of, just sort of, don't do drugs type of messaging to more building up strengths among individuals and families and communities.
Fantastic. And now, I mean, I know no academic wishes for things to go in a particular direction so that their work is relevant, but given the year that we just had, I think your work on resilience and the take that you're taking is particularly important.
Yeah, well, obviously, the pandemic has been, a brutal experience for everyone, but I think that it has helped show even people who are really privileged or really lucky or some combination of the two, that you just never know when trauma is going to touch your life. And, the burden of the pandemic is something that's not going to go away. The traumatic experiences that we've all had, all the anxiety and loss. And so that is something that we're all going to need to keep working on overcoming, even when we're able to take our mask off and go back to our usual routines. We're still going to be carrying that experience with us.
And then we chat a little bit about this prior to the session to start. But another thing that has really, the pandemic has made have brought back in terms of importance in our lives is the recognition of the interconnectedness and of all the various forms of violence. And we have seen surges in crimes, surges in intimate partner violence, and the tendency sometimes for policymakers and practitioners is to see them as their own area of intervention and to go in that direction as silos. A couple of years back, again, not really wishing that things would happen to demonstrate that you were right, but a couple of years back, you did write a wonderful book on the web of violence that spoke about the interrelationship between different forms of violence. And I wondered if you have had a chance to now rethink, the current situation given your previous thoughts in this area.
Sure. Well, the current situation, I think, does reinforce one of the main points of the book that I wrote with John Gritch, which is that a lot of the risk factors and the vulnerabilities are the same for many different types of violence. And so the pandemic is a terrific example of how you can get into these cascades or these vicious cycles, because everyone has been in dramatically different life circumstances. I mean, some of us have been, locked down at home. We've all been restricting our activities. A lot of kids have been home from school. We've lost a lot of our social supports and a lot of our community support. So many people with children, for example, have had the stresses of taking care of their kids and trying to support the education of their kids while they're also still trying to work, and they've lost schools and daycares, and so all of those things are not just going to have one particular outcome. They are going to contribute to all kinds of risk and vulnerabilities, and that's why we can see lots of these different problems emerging at the same time. And really is, unfortunately, like you said, common among institutions, but not a very good solution to the problem, to be focusing on all the different manifestations, whether it's community crime or property crime or domestic violence or child abuse or whatever the problem is, when we should all be focusing together on the underlying problems that have caused this. And I think hopefully with the pandemic, that at least one thing that people might learn from that is that to see how a single risk factor can produce a lot of different bad outcomes, and should shift our work to trying to get rid of those risk factors.
One of the things that has really a spin-off of the pandemic experience that we had is that I think there is much greater awareness and I would say also a more refined understanding among the general population about prevention and about the small steps that we can take each and to help promote a better world, so to speak, and a healthier world, and even how some small steps can have big consequences. And I know that this is your prevention, that you've been dedicated to the prevention efforts in the area of violence all of your life. And so what do you think about this? This new, do you think this is a promising time? Do you think this will fade away too, or can we capitalize on this?
I'm hopeful that we'll be able to capitalize on some of the changes. I think that, people have seen how dramatically we can change our behavior in relatively short periods of time, obviously this was under traumatic circumstances, and so you don't want that, but I think it has created a unique and even historic opportunity to rethink the way that we do things, and I hope that we will capitalize on it. And a lot of people are talking about how they want to keep being able to work from home, for example, or how it has helped them recognize priorities in their life or reorganize priorities in their life. And so all of those kinds of things are classic post-traumatic growth signs, and hopefully that can really lead to some lasting change.
Fantastic. Now, just to wrap this up, Sherry, could you give us coming attractions of what you'll be talking to us on June 11th?
Sure. So on June 11th, we are going to be talking a little bit about trauma and how pervasive that is. And of course, the pandemic is one example of how it has really added to everybody's trauma burden. But the good news about that, and the silver lining about that, is that if trauma is a lot more common than people have recognized, especially when you take a more holistic and comprehensive approach, it also means that resilience has to be a lot more common than people recognize too. And there are lots of people out there, I have a trauma history myself, and so there's lots of different ways that people have managed to put together good lives despite extensive trauma histories. And there's so much untapped wisdom out there about how people do manage to overcome trauma. And I think we're finally starting to incorporate some of those insights into the science and practice. And so we're going to be talking about that on June 11th, and I hope people will come and check it out.
Thank you very much. We're looking forward to do it, and for the benefit of the audience too, we will put a link together with this brief conversation with Sherry, where you have access to a TED Talk where she eloquently talks about her experiences of trauma and also her movement towards healing and growth. Thank you, Sherry, and we're looking forward to having you with us on the 11th. All right.
Thank you, Etiony, and I'm excited that it's coming up soon.